The whole reason why I put this video together is to show awareness to sex trafficking victims, and there's organizations out there that are willing to help, like Breaking Free. In 2015, Minnesota was recorded as the third highest in human trafficking. In 2010, FBI considered Minnesota the 13th largest in child prostitution. Also in 2010, 213 women were sold every 5 minutes over the internet.
My name is Tony Kyler. I'm a women's advocate. I work in housing for Breaking Free, and I was going to tell you a little bit about my story. It would probably have to start when I was about 14 years old. I lived with my mom in the suburbs. She was a single parent. Growing up, I was usually pretty happy. I was a cheerleader, I ran track, I played basketball, I was on student council member, but at the age of 14, I was raped by 3 men, and that changed my life dramatically. My mom tried to put me in counseling and really tried to help me through the process, but I was very rebellious. I really didn't know how to express my emotions or articulate my words of how angry I was. At the time, my dad was in federal prison, so when he was released, it took me about 2 months of begging my mom to let me go live with him. And he lived in St. Paul. So going to live with my dad was like day and night from with my mom. My mom had good work ethics, a lot of morals. Being at my dad's, it was very different. I had 3 stepmoms, and that's who he called ladies of the night. I grew to find out they were prostituted women. Even though my dad treated me like a princess, he was not nice to my stepmoms at all. I remember one incident, one of my stepmoms was arguing with him about something, and he was in the kitchen cooking, and he took a pot of hot boiling water and rice and threw it on her back. To this day, I can still remember her body flopping to the floor in agony. He would just simply step over her and ask me if I wanted something to eat. I remember another incident when he was arguing with one of my stepmoms, and they were like in the hallway by the bathroom, and I remember he punched her so hard that she fell out in the tub, and all he did was close the bathroom door and just say it's out of order for a while. So it took me coming to Breaking Free and going to Sisters of Survival, which is a support group that I now teach, and we really break down the dynamics of prostitution. And it took me to go to that class to realize that I was a victim and where the seed was actually planted. And that's when I lived with my dad. He unknowingly planted that seed of prostitution in me, just by me seeing how he treated women, how women are supposed to be obedient. That made me very vulnerable to a trafficker that I would meet later on in my life. But when I stayed with my dad for quite some time till I was about 16. Then I was very rebellious, ran away from home a lot, got a fake ID, started stripping. And when I was 18, one of my stepmoms killed my dad by overdosing him. At that time, I felt like it was me against the world. Even though my dad was mean to them, I still loved him. I was his princess. I did go back to school, and I got my GED, and then I went on to college to get an associate's degree. Unfortunately, when I graduated, I had a degree, but no job. My best friend, like all through junior high and high school, she told me about giving massages. And I thought, okay, that was easy enough. But she failed to leave out the happy endings. That would be, at the end. I never felt clean. I took so many showers. And that's when I started into the life more so. I remember walking around downtown. It was when GameWorks was there. And I remember it was kind of raining, drizzling a little bit. I really didn't have a destination. And that's when I met my trafficker. He circled me a couple times. And then he asked if I needed a ride, and I said yeah, even though I didn't have anywhere to go. He had such a nice car, he spoke well, he had really nice clothes. He told me about he had co-workers at his house, and that I would be a perfect candidate for an escort. And I wasn't sure of what an escort was, and how he explained it. He said, well, you'll just, I'll get you these really nice dresses, and you'll go on these dinners and stuff with these men, and that's all you have to do. And you go to their condos. So I thought that was, easy enough. So my very first call that I went on, and it was right, he did get my hair and my nails done. He let me drive one of his mini cars. The first one I went on, we did go to dinner. It was a really nice restaurant. And we went back to his condo. And when sex was initiated, I declined. When I got back home, before I even got one foot stepped in the door, I remember him snatching the money from me. He hit me so hard, I did a 360 and I hit the floor. I remember him yelling at me to get up or he was going to kick me. Apparently I didn't move fast enough because he kicked me so hard in my stomach that I peed on myself before I stood up. And he just yelled at me, you give conversation with the obligation to buy. So at that point is when I think I kind of knew that my life was not going to be the same. So when you're in a stable, you have your trafficker, you have the bottom bitch, and then you have the other ladies who work. So all the ladies that interact with each other are called wife-in-laws. I was the oldest out of all of us. My trafficker, he had us all set up different. There was one of us who was she stripped a lot, and there was another one, and she walked the streets. He sent me out of state all the time. So I was always in Nevada at the brothels or something. And when I think about it now, I think the reason why he sent me out so far away is because I had family here. So, and that's one of the tactics that the traffickers will use, is to isolate you from your support system. So my name was changed to Deja. Tony no longer existed. I remember one incident with being with him. Two of my wife-in-laws weren't getting along, and we all had to go to downstairs for a family meeting. And he stripped them, he handcuffed them together, and he sprayed them with water, and he whooped them with metal hangers. At that point, I remember just standing there. It's you want to help and you want to reach out, but you can't. And I know now that that's another tactic that they use, because just out of fear, you're going to still obey because you don't want that to happen to you. But I do remember their welts were about as long as my hand and lacerations in them. So when I saw him do that, that's when I really knew, I didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to see the other girls get abused. He sent me back out to Nevada, and when I was out there, that's when I kind of made up my mind. I was like, okay, I think I need to leave him. But I had that guilt because I didn't want to leave my wife-in-laws, I didn't want to leave them. And then it's and if I say something to them, who's to say that they're gonna come, that they're gonna be on board and want to come with me or just help? So I did, when I was in Nevada, I hitchhiked back to Minnesota. Ironically, there were some nice truck drivers. But coming back from Nevada, I had a cocaine addiction. And I drank a lot. So when I came back, I stayed in hotels, but my money was depleting very fast between the cocaine and the hotels. I remember catching the bus, going to my mom's house to visit my mom, and I was right off Broadway. I believe the gas station is called Winners now. But I was walking past it, going up to the gas station, and I just remember hearing this loud screech coming right behind my legs, just barely touching my legs. When I turned around and I saw my trafficker hop out the passenger side of the Cadillac, he had a bat. He was coming toward me, and he swung, and I took one step back, and I turned around to run, and everything went black. The first time I woke up, it was the gas station attendant, and then there were just other people over me asking me if I was okay. and then I blacked out again. When I woke up, I was in the hospital and they were putting staples in the back of my head. So apparently when I turned around to run, he hit me in the back of the head with the bat. He was kicking me and yelling obscenities, and that's when the gas station attendant threatened to call the police. When the police came up to the hospital, they were kind of frustrated with me because I wouldn't give up my trafficker's name or tell them who did it. But how my thinking was is, if he did this to me for just leaving, what do you think he's gonna do if I tell? You know, it kind of goes back to like that power and control wheel with like domestic abuse. I mean, even though he did that, I was still, in a sense, I was still loyal. My mom did come get me from the hospital, and I stayed with her for a while. I did get a job as a PCA, but waiting 2 weeks for a paycheck, it wasn't clicking to me at the time. So I think more at that point, I was more addicted to the money, so to say. I did go back to him, and how can I say, like, when I went back, it was more so all eyes on me, you know, like, I didn't get my free time or anything. It was just strictly just work, send me out, work, send me out. But I had that impression, like, no matter where I was, he was always watching me, or he could always see me. I remember one incident, I left from doing a call, and I called to check in with him to let him know I was done, and I told him I was hungry, I was gonna stop at Burger King. He told me no, I couldn't stop at Burger King, I need to go to the next call. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So I go to Burger King anyways, and while I'm in the drive-thru, he called me, he was cursing at me, didn't I tell you couldn't stop at Burger King? So, and I remember just dipping out of the drive-thru so fast, and I just went on to my next call. It just always seemed like he was everywhere. When, then I had just another one of those. I think that's the hardest thing, like, for a lot of women who want to leave, it's those barriers of, I technically, like, all the money you make, you don't get to keep it. It goes all to your trafficker. And so you kind of feel stuck, like you can't leave. And like, where are you going to go? Who's going to accept me? If you have charges, back then, nobody would rent to me because I had prostitution charges. They automatically assumed and accused me, like, of I would start a brothel on their property. So it was one night, I did have, like, what I called tough money, that, you know, I kept some of my tips and I would just stack them aside. And I told my wife-in-laws, I said, I know it's your duty and your loyalty to tell him that I'm leaving, but please just give me a 20-minute head start, you know. And, you know, I stole some of his money too, some of his drugs, and I left. I went up north. While I was in St. Cloud, I figured that I could be a drug dealer instead, but I was still selling myself, in a sense, because I would sleep with the dope man, you know, to get an ounce or half ounce or whatever, and then I would sell the drugs. So my distorted thinking, you know, I'm a drug dealer now instead. But I had 3 control buys done on me when I was up there. I was on the run with 5 felony warrants. So now it's like the survival part kicked in. So if I didn't have, you know, any drugs, you know, I would have to sleep with people just to stay the night at their house, just to have something to eat, just to be able to wash my clothes, you know. And the police finally did catch me. And when I was in St. Cloud, when I was in the county jail, I had a altercation with another, the woman I shared my cell with. So I was put into SEG for 27 days. I had the Bible to read, and one of the COs, they let me pick a book, and the name of that book was Walking Pray. And in the book, they talked about, briefly about breaking free. At that time, I didn't even know breaking free was in Minnesota. So after my SEG time, I was sentenced to, first they said 105 months, and then dropped it down to 75 months in Shakopee prison. So, and then while I was there, I kind of knew like, okay, I want to do boot camp, but I still didn't have an idea of what I wanted to do upon release, because in my world, I was just like, this was the first time I was ever sober in a long time, because I used drugs and alcohol a lot as a coping mechanism, because there's no way that any woman can go out and sleep with 10 guys a day and not have to do something to numb that. So I did get into boot camp. When it got closer toward my release date, my case manager, she was asking me, well, what do you plan on doing when you get out? What are you going to do? And that's when it just kind of clicked in me, and I was like, I want to help other women get out of sex trafficking. For me, prison was a bittersweet blessing, because it gave me time to really think and open my eyes, and that was my escape out of the life. But a lot of women, you kind of feel hopeless and stuck. So I remember my case manager, she went and looked up on the internet, and she printed me out Breaking Free's homepage, and she said, well, I think this would be a good start for you. So when I was released, I had to stay a year in treatment at Resource. It's called a Vivo now. And I had a case manager there, and I remember leaving her office, and ironically, Breaking Free was teaching classes there on Thursdays from 1 to 3. And I remember walking in, and that's when I first met Jennifer Gaines. And they did my intake over the phone, and that was the first time I would say I ever felt like I was around other people, other women who understood me, understood the struggles. It was there where I learned, you don't have to live in this life. Whatever your barriers are, Breaking Free will help and support you through those. So I graduated from SOS. It's a 14-week intense study as sex trafficking as a slave-based system. The impact it has on oneself, children, and community. We work with steps on boundaries, communication, and relationships. Because a lot of time being in the life, you're passive or you're aggressive or passive-aggressive. So you get to meet that line on being assertive. And how to stand up speak for yourself without hurting the other person, to make that, that common ground. We touch a little bit on addiction and recovery, but what I found a lot of women to say is, drugs aren't my problem, prostitution is my problem. If you can help me with the prostitution piece, I can knock that addiction part out. So after I graduated from SOS, I went on to Speakers Bureau, which is also a 14-week course. And it's where you learn to break down your story and to be able to speak it. And you go to the, Men's Breaking Free program, and you get to speak to the buyers, and let them know what you were really thinking and what you were really feeling. And to let them know every time that they chose to choose a woman as a commodity or to purchase a person, that you take a little bit of piece of her every time. And I really enjoyed that. So then I volunteered to teach SOS myself, and then Breaking Free hired me on as a facilitator to teach it. Then Breaking Free hired me on to be the women's housing advocate, and that's where I am now.